On a frozen road in a small Montana town, a police officer nearly lost control of his truck when two tiny German Shepherd puppies ran straight into his headlights during a blizzard. No fear, no hesitation, just purpose. What those puppies were trying to show him would change his life forever, and it would take him on a journey through snow, heartbreak, hope, and a miracle he never believed would come. If you love stories about animals, courage, and second chances, this one will stay with you. And before we begin, tell us where you are watching from today and leave your city and country in the comments so we can send you a warm hello wherever you are in the world. Snow had been falling over Hollow Pine, Montana since before dusk, the kind of winter storm that erased edges and softened the world until the town looked like something painted by a lonely god. Hollow Pine itself was a small mountain settlement pressed between dark forests and frozen hills, a place where old wooden storefronts leaned into the wind and street lamps glowed like candles against the cold. On nights like this, the mountains seemed closer, as if they were listening. The highway that curved around the northern edge of town, Old Timberline Road, was already half buried beneath drifting snow when Officer Cillian Rourke guided his patrol truck through it at a cautious crawl. Cillian was 38 years old, 6'2", broad through the shoulders from years of wearing duty gear and carrying more than he ever talked about. His dark hair was cut short, flecked already with strands of winter gray, and a faint scar crossed his right eyebrow, a souvenir from a long-ago rollover accident on this same stretch of road. His eyes were the color of storm clouds just before snowfall, and people in Hollow Pine often said he looked like a man who had learned how to stand still inside difficult weather. He was quiet with strangers, kind with the old folks who waved him down for help with frozen locks or broken heaters, patient with the kids who treated his cruiser like a moving landmark. But there was a part of him that never quite came home anymore. 2 years earlier, his K9 partner Briggs, a black Labrador with gold-brown eyes and the soul of a soldier, had died from cancer in Cillian's living room, and Cillian had been holding him when his breathing finally stopped. Since that night, Cillian had learned how to keep his heart folded, like a letter you cannot bear to read again but cannot throw away either. He still lived alone in the small house on Pinecrest Street, still brewed his coffee too strong, still hung Briggs's worn leather leash on the same hook by the door. And on nights like this, when the snow erased the world and the radio stayed quiet, he found himself driving slower than necessary, as if the road itself might ask him a question he was not ready to answer. The heater hummed in the truck, the windshield wipers scraped steady arcs through the snow, and the yellow glow of his headlights cut 2 narrow tunnels through the storm. That was when he saw them. 2 shapes burst out of the dark tree line ahead, barely visible through the blowing white, moving too fast, too small, too wrong to be deer. Cillian's foot slammed onto the brake. The truck skidded slightly on the ice before stopping with a shudder that rattled his teeth. His pulse jumped hard into his throat. The shapes resolved themselves in the headlight beam. 2 German Shepherd puppies, no more than 4 months old, thin enough that their ribs showed beneath their winter-matted coats, black and tan fur crusted with snow and road salt. One of them, a male later to be called Coda, stood on his hind legs, front paws raised, waving them with frantic purpose. Coda was small for his age, his left ear still half flopped while the right one struggled to stand, his eyes a fierce amber, bright with something sharper than fear. The other, a female later named Wren, barked in short, broken bursts, her voice too big for her narrow chest, her muzzle dusted white with frost, her dark eyes wide and desperate. They did not run from the truck. They did not freeze. They stood their ground in the storm like 2 tiny sentinels, as if the road itself had given them a mission. Cillian opened the driver's door and the cold knifed in, stealing his breath. He stepped down onto the frozen asphalt, boots crunching, gloved hands raised slightly so he would not frighten them. "Hey! What are you doing out here?" he called, his voice lost quickly in the wind. The puppies stared at him. Coda dropped to all fours, took 3 steps backward, then turned and ran toward the trees. Wren followed, then both of them stopped and looked back at him, their bodies taut, waiting. Something in Cillian's chest shifted. It was not logic that moved him forward, not training, not even duty. It was the quiet certainty that this was not random, that no creature ran into traffic during a blizzard without a reason carved deep into its bones. He shut the cruiser door, grabbed his flashlight, and followed them off the road into the dark. The forest swallowed sound. Snow softened his steps. The smell of pine and frozen earth closed around him. The puppies moved carefully now, slowing so he could keep up, their bodies brushing close to each other, like they had practiced this path before. They led him beneath a cluster of low-leaning pine trees where the wind had not stripped the ground bare, where fallen needles and branches created a fragile shelter against the storm. And there, half buried in snow, lay their mother. She was a full-grown German shepherd, her once proud body reduced to fragile lines beneath her skin, her fur thin and dull, her sides barely lifting with each breath. Her name was not yet known, but the shape of her told a long story of hunger, cold, and fierce devotion. One of her ears was nicked at the tip, the fur along her flank scarred with old wounds. Her eyes were closed, lashes rimmed with ice. Coda pressed against her throat and whimpered, a sound that vibrated with panic. Ren climbed onto the curve of her chest and began licking her frozen eyelids with slow, careful strokes, as if trying to paint her awake. Cillian dropped to his knees in the snow. The sight hollowed him. He had seen death many times in uniform, but this was different. This was not violence. This was quiet surrender. He reached out, then stopped himself, afraid of how fragile she looked, afraid of what it would mean if he touched her and she did not respond. Around her neck hung a ruined leather collar, nearly worn through. Attached to it was a thin strip of metal, scratched by hand. He brushed the snow away with shaking fingers and read the words carved there. "Stay with them." His throat tightened. The memory of Briggs surged into him without permission, the weight of a dying body against his knees, the promise he had whispered into a room that would never answer him again. "I will not do this twice," he had sworn. The puppies shifted, placing themselves between him and their mother. No teeth bared, no growl in their throats, only an unyielding line of small bodies and impossible courage. Cillian exhaled, long and slow, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt his promise begin to crack. He lifted his radio and spoke into the storm. "Dispatch, this is Rourke. I have 2 juvenile German shepherds and 1 adult female in critical condition near Old Timberline, North Sector. The adult is hypothermic and severely malnourished. I need emergency veterinary response." The wind howled around him, the snow kept falling, and somewhere beneath the pine branches, a mother clung to life while her children stood guard, waiting for a man they had chosen on a road that would not let him pass. The storm thickened after Cillian's radio call, as if the mountain itself were leaning closer to listen. Snow slid from the pine branches in heavy white sighs, and the wind wound its way through the trees like something alive, whispering of long winters and forgotten things. Cillian remained kneeling beside the mother dog, his patrol coat already crusted with ice, his knees sinking deeper into the cold. He studied her with the same careful attention he once gave Briggs when the sickness first appeared, reading every shallow rise of her ribs, every tremor beneath her skin. She was beautiful in a way that broke him, not in the sleek, healthy lines of a well-fed working dog, but in the fragile dignity of something that had refused to surrender even when the world demanded it. Her fur, once thick and proud, hung in uneven clumps, dark and dull beneath the snow. Old scars traced faint silver maps along her flank and shoulder, each one a sentence from a story she had lived in silence. Her ears, one nicked at the tip, lay slack against her skull, rimmed with frost. Cillian slid off his glove and pressed 2 fingers gently against her chest, just behind her front leg, counting the beat that answered him. It was there, weak, slow, but it was there. He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Coda and Ren shifted when he moved closer, the male pup's small body angled protectively between Cillian's hand and their mother's face. Coda's amber eyes did not blink, his half-flopped ear twitching at the sound of the wind. For a creature so young, his posture carried the weight of an old soldier. Ren hovered closer to their mother's ribs, her slim body pressed into the curve of the adult dog's side as if she were trying to share warmth through sheer will. Ren's coat was darker than Coda's, the tan of her chest almost swallowed by the black of her back, her muzzle narrow, her eyes soft but burning with the same urgency. Cillian lifted both hands slowly, palms open, lowering himself further into the snow so that his face was closer to theirs, his voice a quiet thing shaped by years of talking people down from ledges, from fear, from anger, from themselves. "I'm not here to hurt her," he said. "I'm going to get help." The pups did not move, but the tension in Coda's shoulders eased a fraction. The radio crackled faintly at Cillian's side, a voice answering through the storm. "Unit 12, veterinary rescue is en route, ETA 8 minutes. 8 minutes felt like a lifetime. Cillian shrugged out of his coat and draped it over the mother dog's torso, careful not to startle her, careful not to touch her hips or spine. Her skin beneath the coat was cold, dangerously so. He reached into his truck for the emergency thermal blanket and returned, spreading it gently over her back, creating a pocket of fragile warmth against the wind. The pups watched every move, Coda's body shifting in precise mirrors of Cillian's hands, Ren's nose brushing their mother's whiskers again and again. Cillian poured a small amount of water from his canteen into the cap and slid it near the mother's mouth. She did not react, but Coda sniffed the water, then nudged the cap closer to her lips, a gesture so deliberate it stole something from Cillian's chest. "You're doing good," he murmured, though he was no longer certain whether he was speaking to the dogs or to himself. Minutes dragged. The snow continued its quiet assault. Cillian flexed his fingers inside his gloves to keep the feeling in them. The mother dog stirred once, a low sound vibrating in her throat, more breath than voice. Ren stiffened instantly, her ears lifting, her tail trembling. Coda leaned forward, touching his nose to the side of the adult dog's muzzle. The sound faded, leaving only the wind. Cillian's phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Dr. Maren Voss, the veterinarian on call for Hollow Pine Veterinarian Search, a woman in her early 40s with steel blonde hair and a reputation for calm under impossible pressure. "We're close. Hold on," Cillian typed back with numb fingers. "She's alive. Barely. Hypothermic. Pups guarding." He tucked the phone away and looked back at the mother dog, whose breath now formed the faintest cloud beneath the blanket. Somewhere far down the road, the sound of an engine fought the storm. Headlights flickered between the trees. The rescue truck emerged like a ship through fog, its yellow beacons casting slow halos across the snow. Dr. Maren Voss jumped out before the vehicle fully stopped, her boots crunching toward them, followed by two veterinary technicians. Liam Ortega, a compact, dark-haired man in his late 20s with quick hands and a steady gaze, and Grace Harlow, tall and thin, red hair pulled into a braid, her expression open and serious. They took in the scene in a single sweep, the prone mother, the two guarding pups, Cillian kneeling in the snow. "She breathing?" Maren asked. "Yes," Cillian replied. "Weak, but yes." Maren knelt immediately, sliding her gloved hand beneath the thermal blanket, checking the gums, the ears, the temperature at the pads of the paws. "Severe hypothermia, starvation, dehydration," she said quietly, not for drama, but for truth. "But she's holding." Grace unfolded the portable wind barrier while Liam opened the medical kit, their movements fluid from long practice. Coda bristled when Liam reached toward the mother dog, a low growl trembling in his chest, his small body pressed tight against her face. Cillian shifted closer to the pup, placing his hand on the snow between them, not touching, not pushing. "Easy, boy," he said. "They're here to help." Coda looked at him, really looked, his amber eyes sharp, measuring. Then, slowly, he stepped back one paw length, giving the space the humans needed, but never breaking the line between himself and his mother. Ren stayed where she was until Grace gently lifted her away, cradling the trembling pup against her chest. Ren did not fight, but she did not relax either, her gaze fixed on the mother dog as if tethered by an invisible thread. They slid the mother dog onto the stretcher, securing her with careful hands, IV fluid already flowing. She weighed almost nothing. "She should be around 65 pounds, Maren murmured. "She's barely 40. The stretcher was loaded into the truck. The snow swallowed the place where she had lain, erasing the shape of her body as if it had never been there. Cillian stood frozen for a moment, the forest suddenly too quiet. Coda and Ren turned to him at the same time, the storm in their eyes now mixed with something else. A question. Cillian opened the back door of his patrol truck. "Come on," he said. They did not hesitate. Coda leapt up onto the seat, tail stiff, eyes never leaving the rescue vehicle. Ren curled into the floorboard, her chin resting on her paws, shaking. Cillian climbed behind the wheel and pulled onto the road behind the rescue truck, the convoy moving slow through the storm toward the lights of Hollow Pine. As they drove, Cillian's hands tightened on the steering wheel, not from the cold but from the sudden weight of something he had not planned. 2 lives, no, 3, had crossed his path tonight, and the road, the snow, the quiet town ahead all seemed to know that nothing would be the same again. The lights of Hollow Pine rose out of the storm like a promise made of gold. The town sat cupped between dark mountains, its streets dusted white, shop windows glowing, smoke lifting from chimneys into the wind. Cillian followed the rescue truck through the narrow roads, past the old post office, the bakery with its frosted windows, the diner that never quite closed, until the low building of Hollow Pine Veterinary and Search came into view, its sign half buried in snow, its front windows shining like a harbor in the dark. He pulled into the lot as the rescue truck slid under the awning. Coda and Ren did not make a sound as Cillian stopped the engine. Their eyes stayed locked on the doors of the truck where their mother lay. Dr. Maren Voss jumped down first, already calling instructions, her breath clouding the cold. Inside, the clinic smelled of disinfectant, warm air, and animals. The contrast from the storm was violent, like stepping from one world into another. They wheeled the mother dog through the doors and straight toward the treatment wing. Her body looked even smaller under the bright lights, her ribs like shadows beneath her skin. Grace carried Ren, whispering to her without words, while Liam stayed close behind Coda, who followed on his own, refusing to be carried, his small paws tapping across the tile with stubborn resolve. Cillian walked with them, the radio clipped at his shoulder now silent, his uniform soaked with melted snow, his chest tight with something he could not name. In the ICU room, machines blinked awake, cables, monitors, IV lines, heat lamps. Maren and her team moved with swift precision, checking vitals, warming the mother's core, inserting lines, stabilizing her breathing. Cillian stood back, pressed against the wall, afraid to get in the way, afraid to leave. Coda paced once, then stopped at the doorway, his body squared, his ears high. Ren wriggled free from Grace's arms and pressed herself against Cillian's leg, trembling. "She's in critical condition," Maren said, not unkindly, not dramatically, simply as fact. "We've got fluids in, warming her slowly. The next few hours are everything." She looked at the pups, then at Cillian. "They can't stay in the ICU. Too much risk of infection, too much stress. But they can wait in the hall. Close enough." Cillian nodded, because he trusted her, because her voice had the weight of mountains in it. He led Coda and Ren to the hallway just outside the glass doors, where a bench ran along the wall and the floor was warm beneath their paws. They settled there, Coda sitting upright, unblinking, Ren curling small, her head on her paws, her eyes fixed on the blurred shape of their mother beyond the frosted window. Time slowed. Snow whispered against the building. The machines hummed. A volunteer named Eleanor Pike, an elderly woman with silver hair and the softest voice Cillian had ever heard, brought a blanket and laid it over the pups. She spoke to them as if they were old friends. They did not respond, but they did not pull away. Cillian sat on the floor beside them, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, his gloved hands clasped together. He told them about Briggs without meaning to, about the way Briggs used to steal socks and hide them under the couch, about the way he had learned to open the fridge, about the night he had died, and how Cillian had sworn he would never do this again. Coda inched closer, his shoulder touching Cillian's arm. Ren crawled into Cillian's lap, too tired to pretend she was brave anymore. Somewhere near midnight, the storm began to quiet. The wind softened. The snow fell straight down. Cillian's eyes burned with exhaustion, but he did not leave. He could not. He watched the glass door, waiting for it to open, for something to change. And then it did. The door swung wide and Maren stepped out, pulling off her gloves. Her face was pale with fatigue, but her eyes were steady. "She opened her eyes," she said. Coda released a single sharp bark that echoed down the hallway. Ren lifted her head, her tail thumping weakly against the tile. Cillian swallowed hard. "Is she—" "She's still critical," Maren said. "But she's fighting. That matters." They stayed there as the night passed into early morning. The town outside slept. The lights in the clinic dimmed, then brightened again. Coda eventually lowered himself, his head resting on Cillian's boot. Ren fell asleep in Cillian's lap, twitching in her dreams. A technician passed by and whispered, "Those pups haven't moved once." Cillian nodded. He already knew. They were guarding her with the only tools they had: presence, patience, love. When dawn finally touched the windows with pale blue, Cillian felt something loosen inside his chest. He did not know what the next days would bring. He did not know if he could survive another goodbye. But for now, he stayed, because sometimes saving something did not begin with action. Sometimes it began with not leaving. Morning came to Hollow Pine quietly. as if the storm itself had grown tired of speaking. Pale light crept through the frosted windows of the clinic, brushing the hallway walls in soft blue. Outside, snow lay unbroken along the streets, and the town breathed slow and careful under winter's weight. Inside Hollow Pine Veterinarian Search, the world had narrowed to one hallway, one glass door, one woman-shaped shadow on a steel table beyond the frost. Cillian had not moved from the floor since before dawn. His back leaned against the wall, his coat spread beneath him, one knee drawn up, one boot extended. Coda lay with his head on that boot, the rise and fall of his small chest finally steady. Wren slept in Cillian's lap, her nose tucked under his jacket, her paws twitching now and then as if she were running through dreams. Cillian watched the glass. He did not blink often. The door did not open. Machines hummed. Somewhere deeper in the building, water ran. The world went on, but Cillian and the puppies were anchored here, tied by breath and waiting. Around mid-morning, Dr. Maren Voss returned, her blonde hair pulled loose from its braid, her eyes red with fatigue, but her posture still unbroken. She crouched beside them, lowering her voice so the quiet would not fracture. "Her temperature is up a little," she said. "Not where we want it, but better than last night. Her heart rate is holding." Cillian nodded, afraid to speak. Wren stirred at the sound of Maren's voice, lifting her head and pressing her nose against Cillian's chest. Coda opened one eye, then both, his ears pricking. Maren glanced at the pups. "They know," she said. Cillian almost smiled. Hours passed again. Volunteers moved through the building with soft shoes and careful hands. Eleanor Pike returned with warm water and a bowl of food for the pups. They barely touched it, their attention still locked on the door. Eleanor sighed. "Stubborn as winter," she murmured fondly, and left them in peace. By afternoon, the sky outside had cleared into a brittle blue, the kind of color that only comes after storms that have spent all their anger. Sunlight slid across the floor, stopping just short of the glass door. Cillian stood once to stretch his legs, the blood rushing painfully back into them. When he sat again, Coda moved closer without hesitation, pressing his shoulder into Cillian's thigh. Wren climbed higher into his lap, her tail thumping weakly. Cillian rested his hand between their ears and felt something in himself soften. He remembered the first time Briggs had leaned against him during a stakeout, the warmth of that living weight in the cold. He had forgotten what that felt like. Near evening, Maren stepped out again, this time with a paper cup of coffee in her hand. She held it out to Cillian. "You look worse than my patients," she said, attempting humor. Cillian accepted the cup, the steam burning his fingers. "Any change?" he asked. Maren hesitated just a breath. "She's stable, still critical, but she's responding to fluids, and she reacted when Grace brushed her muzzle." Cillian closed his eyes, relief and fear tangling together. Wren's ears lifted. Coda rose to his feet, tail rigid. "Can they see her?" Cillian asked. Maren shook her head gently. "Not yet. Too risky, but she knows they're here." As if summoned by the words, a faint sound drifted through the door, a low, trembling breath that was almost a whine. Wren froze. Her whole body went still, her ears high, her eyes bright. Coda stepped closer to the glass, nose pressed to the frost. Cillian's throat tightened. "That was her," he whispered. Maren nodded. Night fell again. The clinic lights dimmed. Snow outside glittered under the moon. Cillian stayed. He did not go home. He did not call in sick. He remained because the waiting itself had become the work. Around midnight, Grace brought a blanket and draped it over Cillian's shoulders. He barely noticed. He watched the door, the glass, the shadow beyond. Then, sometime after the clock in the lobby struck 2, the door opened. Maren stepped out, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. "She's breathing more evenly," she said. "She's still weak, still in danger, but there's something in her. Some fight." Cillian exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath since the storm began. Coda barked once, a sharp sound that echoed down the empty hall. Wren stood on her hind legs and pressed her paws against Cillian's chest, licking his chin. Cillian laughed, a sound that surprised him with its weight. "We're not done," Maren said, meeting his eyes. "But we're not losing her tonight." They remained there until morning, until the first gray light returned to the windows, until the town of Hollow Pine began to wake again. The storm had passed, but something else had begun. And in that narrow hallway, where hearts waited and refused to leave, Hope took its first unsteady breath. The snow had not stopped, but the storm had. Over Hollow Pine, winter now fell in a slower voice, as if the mountains themselves were exhausted from shouting. The streets shone beneath a thin new layer of white, the town hushed and ordinary again, and inside the clinic, the long night of waiting finally bent toward morning. Cillian stood in the office of Dr. Marin Voss, the smell of coffee and disinfectant mixing in the air, while Marin slid a clipboard across the desk toward him. Her movements were precise, practiced, but there was something gentler in her eyes now. "We're overloaded," she said. 3 rescues came in overnight. Your 2 are healthy enough to leave the building, and they'll be calmer somewhere quiet. Their mother needs intensive monitoring for the next few weeks. Can you foster them?" Cillian looked down at the paperwork. His name, his address on Pinecrest Street, his signature line empty and waiting. The question was not really in Marin's voice. It was in his chest. He hesitated. His hand hovered. Ren nudged his knee. Coda pawed at the door, already impatient with anything that stood between him and open space. Cillian exhaled, slow and deep, then signed. "Temporary," he said, as if the word could build a wall around his heart. Marin's mouth curved slightly. "Temporary," she agreed, though both of them knew that winter had already crossed the threshold of his life. The drive home was quiet. Coda sat tall on the passenger seat, nose to the glass, studying the world as if mapping it for the first time. Ren curled in the floorboard, her head resting on her paws, her eyes following every movement of Cillian's hands on the wheel. The town slid by, the diner, the hardware store, the church steeple wrapped in snow. At Pinecrest Street, Cillian parked in front of his small cedar house, its porch light glowing faintly, the same way it had every night since Briggs died. He opened the door. The house smelled like old coffee and winter and memory. Coda stepped in first, his paws clicking across the wood floor, his head turning left, right, cataloging. Ren followed more slowly, brushing against Cillian's leg with every step, as if afraid that if she let go of him, the world might fall apart again. The silence inside was thick, almost accusing. Cillian shrugged off his coat and hung it on the hook beside Briggs's leash. The sight of the leash made something in his throat tighten. He moved into the living room and pulled the old dog bed from the closet, the one he had never been able to throw away. The fabric was faded, one corner chewed from long ago, but it still smelled faintly of leather and pine and Briggs. Cillian set it down near the heater. Ren approached at once. She lowered her nose into the cushion, inhaled deeply, then looked up at Cillian, her eyes wide, her ears soft. "That was his spot," Cillian said, not sure why he spoke. Ren circled once and lay down without hesitation. Coda padded over and dropped beside her, his nose touching her shoulder in the same way he had pressed against their mother under the pine trees. Cillian stood there longer than he meant to, his arms hanging uselessly at his sides, the house already changing shape around him. The days began to form a rhythm, mornings with frost on the windows, coffee steaming on the counter. Coda learned how to nose open the bottom cabinet and steal the dish towel. Ren learned how to bark only once when she needed to go outside. They followed Cillian from room to room as if he were the center of gravity, their shadows never far from his feet. He called the clinic every afternoon. Marin's updates came in careful increments, fluids stable, fever rising, then falling, weight still dangerously low. "She ate a little today," Marin said one evening, and Cillian found himself gripping the edge of the sink so hard his knuckles went white. "That's good," he whispered. Coda's ears lifted. Ren's tail thumped once. They understood the word good. Grief does not leave just because you add noise, but the noise helped. The house was no longer hollow. It breathed again, messy and loud and alive. Cillian laughed for the first time in months when Coda tried to carry a stick twice his size through the doorway and got it wedged. Ren tackled him the moment he made it inside, and they tumbled across the tile like wrestlers. Cillian had to sit down, the laughter tearing out of him before he could stop it. Later that week, he found himself standing in the pet store aisle, unsure how he had gotten there. The smell of rawhide used to make his chest tighten, but now it didn't. He bought 2 new beds, 3 squeaky toys, bags of food he could not pronounce, and 3 collars. Not 2. 3. The cashier raised an eyebrow. "3 dogs?" she asked. Cillian shrugged. "Someday," he said, and the word felt like a promise he was afraid to look at too closely. The nights were the hardest. When the house went quiet, the memories returned, the shape of Briggs on the floor, the sound of his breathing slowing. Cillian would wake with his heart racing, convinced for a moment that he was back in that room again. Each time, Wren was there, her paw resting on the edge of the bed, her eyes open in the dark, steady. Coda sat at the foot of the mattress, ears perked, the way Briggs used to during storms. They did not ask him anything. They simply stayed. Weeks passed. The snow melted and returned again. The phone calls from Maren grew more hopeful. Her blood work is stabilizing. She stood for a few seconds today. She wagged her tail when she heard their names. Cillian repeated each update aloud to the pups, as if speaking the words made them stronger. They listened, their bodies tensing with every mention of their mother, as if they were tied to her by threads the human eye could not see. One afternoon, Cillian clipped the new collars on the kitchen counter. Blue for Coda, red for Wren, black for the third. He did not say the third name yet. He was not ready. He set the black one aside and looked at the pups, sprawled on the old bed, their chests rising and falling in the same rhythm. The house was warm. Outside, snow fell softly. For the first time in a long while, Cillian was not thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what was waiting. Winter returned to Hollow Pine the morning everything changed, not with fury, but with grace. Snow fell slow and steady, the kind that softened the world instead of breaking it. Cillian stood at the front window of his house on Pinecrest Street, coffee cooling in his hands, watching Coda and Wren chase each other through the thin new blanket of white in the yard. They moved like living sparks, skidding and tumbling, their laughter made of paws and breath and frost. When his phone rang, he knew before he answered. "She's ready," Dr. Maren Voss said, her voice warm and careful. "Still thin, still weak, but stable. You can bring the pups." Cillian closed his eyes and let the moment land. "We're on our way." The drive to the clinic felt different from every other drive he had made in the past weeks. The mountains looked closer, the sky lighter. Coda stood on the seat again, his tail thumping against the door. Wren pressed her nose to the window, leaving small, fogged circles in the glass. When Cillian pulled into the lot of Hollow Pine Veterinarian Search, the pups leapt from the truck before he could even shut the door. Snow scattered under their paws as they ran, straight and fast, toward the gate. She was waiting. The mother dog stood just beyond the fence, her body still narrow, her coat patchy, her legs trembling slightly beneath her weight. But she was upright, alive, watching the world. The moment she saw them, her ears lifted. Her mouth opened just enough to release a sound that was half whine, half sigh, something between pain and miracle. Wren reached her first, crashing into her chest, her voice bursting out of her in a high cry that cut through the cold. Coda slowed only at the last step, then tucked himself beneath his mother's chin, pressing his face against her throat as if making sure her heartbeat was real. The mother bent her head, licking them both, again and again, counting them like blessings. Cillian stopped a few steps back, afraid to break the moment. Snow gathered on his shoulders. Dr. Maren Voss stood beside him, her hands in her coat pockets, her breath a pale cloud. "She still needs meds, careful feeding, gradual exercise," Maren said, "but she's past the edge." Cillian nodded, unable to speak. The mother tried to sit, but her legs buckled. Instantly, Coda and Wren moved, one bracing her shoulder, the other pressing against her side. Cillian started forward, but Maren lifted a hand. "Let them," she said. "She's earned this." And she had. Every scar, every breath, every frozen night in the forest. She held herself upright again, trembling, stubborn, refusing to fall. Maren reached into her pocket and brought out a new collar, simple black leather, a silver tag catching the winter light. She fastened it gently around the mother's neck. "We needed a name for the chart," she said. "I chose Valkyrie." Cillian smiled. "The one who brings warriors home." Maren nodded. "Exactly." Valkyrie turned then, her tired eyes finding Cillian's. She stepped toward him, slow and careful. One step, two. When she reached him, she lowered her head and pressed her forehead into his chest. The weight of her was nothing and everything. Cillian dropped to his knees in the snow, wrapping his arms around all three of them. Fur, breath, heartbeat. The storm that had brought them together had finally loosened its grip. They went home that afternoon. The living room looked different with all three of them in it. Coda claimed the window seat like a watchtower. Wren carried toys from one corner to another, arranging them into piles only she understood. Valkyrie moved slowly, choosing a spot near the door where she could watch everything, her eyes following her pups wherever they went. Each day she grew stronger. Each day the house grew louder. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Dalloway from next door brought a box of biscuits. Tom Keller from the shop dropped off an old ramp for the porch. A little girl named Emily Ross, about 7, with freckles and missing teeth, sat in the yard and drew the 3 dogs with a pink crayon. The mailman started calling them the morning crew. The old bed that once belonged to Briggs became their throne. Valkyrie curled at the back, her paw draped over Coda. Wren stretched across the front like a queen. One evening, Cillian clipped the new collars on, blue for Coda, red for Wren, black for Valkyrie. As he fastened the last buckle, Valkyrie closed her eyes and leaned into his hand. "You did it," Cillian whispered. "You did everything." She exhaled, long and steady, and in that breath he knew it was true. They did not fix his grief, they transformed it. Healing, he learned, did not arrive in thunder. It arrived in paw prints on the floor, in warm bodies at his feet, in laughter that surprised him out of nowhere, in peace. One afternoon they went to the park. Coda chased a frisbee like it owed him money. Wren splashed into the creek without hesitation. Valkyrie walked beside Cillian, slow but proud. People smiled. A stranger asked if they were all his. Cillian said yes, and meant it. That night, under the soft Montana stars, Cillian sat on the porch with Valkyrie's head resting on his thigh, Coda asleep at his feet, Wren curled against his side. For the first time in years, he was not thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about what he had found. Sometimes the smallest ones carry the biggest hearts. Sometimes the ones you save are the ones who save you. And sometimes, in the deepest winter, life finds a way to begin again. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes it arrives on 4 small paws in the middle of winter. This story reminds us that God often works through the quiet and the broken, through the ones the world forgets, through the moments when we think we cannot love again. When Cillian opened his door to those puppies, he did not just save their lives. God used them to heal his heart, just like he does with us, when we think we are too tired, too wounded, too afraid to hope again. In our daily lives, we may not face blizzards or lost puppies, but we all face storms of our own. And sometimes the miracle we are praying for is already standing in front of us, waiting for us to stop and listen. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us what this story meant to you. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of faith, love, and second chances. May God bless every person watching. May he protect your family. May he bring light into your darkest winter. If you believe in miracles, type amen in the comments.